They tell you a man is defined by the secrets he keeps, the battles he's fought, the regrets he carries, the pain he locks away so no one else has to feel it. I believed that. My whole life was built on that belief. I carried my scars in silence, trusted only one person with the truth, my wife. She was supposed to be my safe place, the one who held my past without judgment. But I was wrong. So very wrong. The woman I gave my loyalty, my faith, my entire life, sold me. She sold my secrets, turned my history into her currency. And when I found out, when I saw the smirk on her face, I realized something. She thought I was finished. She thought I wouldn't fight back. But she forgot who I am. She forgot that I've survived worse than betrayal. She forgot that if she wanted war, I'd give her one. And in the end, she would learn the one truth she could never sell, that I'm a man who knows how to survive. At 58, you start to think you've seen the worst life can throw at you. You've buried people you loved. You've worked your hands to the bone. You've been knocked down and dragged yourself back up more times than you can count. But nothing prepares you for betrayal. Not when it comes from the one person you trust more than anyone else in this world. For decades, I thought marriage was sacred. I grew up in a time when a man's word meant something, when vows were unbreakable. My wife and I had stood in front of family and God, promising to carry each other through thick and thin, through darkness and light, until the very end. And I believed her. I believed every word that came out of her mouth that day. She knew everything about me, every scar, every regret, every secret I swore I'd take to the grave. She knew about the things I'd seen, the things I'd done, the memories that still woke me in the dead of night. And she swore that those secrets were safe with her. But betrayal doesn't announce itself. It seeps in like poison, slow, silent, unnoticed until it's too late. The first sign came one Sunday morning at the local diner. I'd been going there for over 20 years. Same seat, same coffee, same faces around me. The kind of place where folks greet you by name, where the waitress doesn't need to ask your order because she already knows. But that morning felt different. The men at the corner table kept glancing my way, whispering like teenagers. A couple of others nodded stiffly, not with the usual warmth, but like they weren't sure if they wanted to be seen talking to me at all. I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining it. But then the waitress, a sweet girl named Ellie, set down my plate of pancakes and leaned close. "Rough night?" she asked in a hushed voice, almost like she pitied me. "What do you mean?" I asked. She bit her lip, nervous. "People are talking, that's all. Don't listen to them." I tried to smile, to shake it off, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. My gut told me something was wrong. The second sign came 2 nights later. A phone call. A voice I didn't recognize. The man laughed like he knew me, like we were old friends. But the things he said, no stranger could have known them. He brought up moments from my past that I'd buried, things only one person in this world knew, my wife. "You think you're respected," he sneered. "But I know who you really are." I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking like I hadn't felt since my days in uniform. My wife found me sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. She asked me what was wrong. I almost told her, but something deep inside me whispered that she already knew. And then came the third blow, the one that left no room for doubt. My old friend Tom, my best friend since high school, showed up on my porch. His face was red, his fists clenched. "Why the hell didn't you tell me?" he shouted. "Tell you what?" I asked, bewildered. He spat the words at me, my secret, word for word, the one I had only ever confessed to my wife. That was the moment the ground beneath me gave way. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted with my soul, had betrayed me. That night, I confronted her. She was standing in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. The smell of garlic and onions lingered in the air. Dinner still simmering on the stove. Such a normal, ordinary scene, and yet everything had changed. "You told them," I said, my voice low. "Dangerous." She didn't flinch. Didn't ask who or what or why. She just looked me dead in the eye and said, "Yes." My chest tightened. "Why?" She sipped her wine slowly, savoring it like she was enjoying the moment. "Because the truth deserves to be told. You walk around this town like you're noble, like you're a good man, but you're not. You're a liar, a coward, and I'm done protecting your image." Her words hit harder than any fist. My hands trembled with rage. "Protecting me?" I growled. "You sold me out." Her lips curved into a cruel smirk. "And I got paid." That word paid seared itself into my brain. My life, my suffering, my mistakes, all reduced to a paycheck. In that moment I didn't see my wife anymore. I saw an enemy, a snake who had slithered into my home, my bed, my heart. She thought she'd broken me. She thought I'd curl up and accept the humiliation. But what she didn't understand was that I've been broken before. I've been left for dead, and every time I've gotten back up, and she had secrets too, darker than mine, secrets that could burn her whole world to the ground. She thought she was the only one who could play this game. But she was wrong, dead wrong, because if she wanted a war, I was ready to fight, and when I was done, the whole world would know her truth. Rage will eat a man alive if he lets it. I knew that. I'd seen men destroy themselves by letting anger run wild. But there's another kind of rage, the quiet kind. The cold, calculated kind. That's the one I felt the night my wife confessed. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I didn't lay a hand on her. I just stood there staring into her eyes, memorizing the cruel smirk that told me everything I needed to know. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd stripped me bare and left me too broken to fight back. But I wasn't broken. I was sharpening. That night, while she slept in the bed we'd shared for 30 years, I sat alone in the living room. The old clock ticked on the mantel, each second pounding into my skull like a war drum. I thought about everything I'd lost in my life, everything I'd endured, and I realized this betrayal wasn't going to be the end of me. No, it was going to be the start of something else. Something far darker. Because here's the thing about secrets. Nobody only has one. And my wife, for all her arrogance, had plenty. I began with the simple things, observing, watching. She thought I was defeated, that I'd retreat into myself. That gave me the freedom to see her clearly for the first time in years. I noticed the way she always kept her phone close now, how she tilted it away when she typed. I noticed her trips into town grew more frequent, the excuses flimsier. I noticed the way she smiled when she got text messages. Smiled in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. And then there were the bank statements. She thought I never looked. For years I trusted her to manage the household finances. She always insisted she was better with numbers, and I didn't argue. But now I combed through every line, and what I found turned my stomach. Withdrawals I didn't recognize. Payments to accounts I didn't know. Thousands of dollars funneled into something or someone I couldn't see. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, but that was only the beginning. One night I followed her. She said she was going to a book club. I knew that was a lie. She hated reading, always had, so I waited until she left, then grabbed my truck and kept my headlights off, following from a distance. She drove across town to a cheap motel on the edge of the highway. I parked in the shadows and watched her get out, her heels clicking on the pavement. A man stepped out of one of the rooms, younger than her, smug grin plastered across his face. She laughed. God, that laugh. Like a teenager sneaking around. My blood ran cold, so it wasn't just my secrets she was selling. She was living a double life, one she thought she could hide forever. I sat there for an hour, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, fighting every instinct to storm over and drag them both into the light. But I didn't, because I knew if I lashed out in that moment, it would all end too quickly. No, I wanted her to suffer, to feel the slow burn of humiliation the way she'd made me feel it. And to do that, I had to be patient. So I started collecting. I took photos. I saved bank statements. I recorded conversations when she thought I wasn't listening. I built a file so thick it could choke a courtroom, and the more I dug, the uglier it got. Turns out my wife wasn't just a liar. She was a predator. She'd been draining my accounts for years, funneling money into her own private nest egg. She'd lied to her friends, telling them stories about me that made me out to be a monster, all while she played the victim. She'd betrayed not just me, but nearly everyone who thought they knew her. I'll admit, there were nights I broke down. Nights I sat in that empty living room, the house so quiet it felt like a tomb, and I asked myself how the hell we got here. How the girl I married, the woman I once believed was my whole world, had turned into this stranger. Nights where the rage gave way to grief so sharp it nearly broke me. But then I'd remember the smirk. The way she looked at me when she said, "I got paid." And the grief would vanish, replaced with a cold fire, because she wasn't going to walk away from this. I decided I wouldn't just expose her to me. I'd expose her to everyone, the same way she'd done to me, only worse. The first step was simple, testing the waters. I left one of the motel photos on the kitchen table one morning. She froze when she saw it, her face going pale. For the first time in weeks, I saw fear in her eyes. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, my silence louder than any words. She tried to laugh it off, tried to regain her composure. "You're delusional." That's nothing, but she knew. She knew the balance of power had shifted. Over the next weeks, I let her squirm. Dropped hints. Left papers where she'd find them. Watched her paranoia grow. She'd check my laptop when she thought I wasn't home. She'd rifle through drawers, desperate to know how much I had on her. And all the while, I stayed calm. Patient, because I knew what was coming. The final straw came when she dared to threaten me. One night she cornered me in the hallway, her eyes blazing. "You think you're smart?" she spat. "You think you can scare me? I'll ruin you. I'll take everything. The house, the money, your reputation. No one will believe you over me." I just smiled, a slow, steady smile that wiped the arrogance right off her face. "Maybe," I said, "but when I'm done, they won't have to believe me. They'll see it for themselves." She went silent, because in that moment she realized I wasn't bluffing, and that was when the war truly began. There's a line between rage and reason. Cross it too soon and you wreck yourself. Stay on the right side long enough, and rage becomes a tool, a quiet, precise instrument you can use to carve away the lies. I learned to hold my breath and count the small moves. I learned the patience of men who've been knocked down and refused to stay there. After I had the motel photo, the bank statements, the recordings, I didn't run to the neighbors waving evidence like a torch. I did what men with something to lose do. I built a case that could not be shrugged off as fiction. I made the truth inconvenient for everyone around her. Inconvenience breeds curiosity. Curiosity breeds confirmation. Confirmation kills a polished story. First, I stopped behaving like a man with nothing left. People love a spectacle, but they also love credibility. So I kept my routine. I kept going to the diner. I brought Ellie an extra coffee on her tough mornings. I fixed Mr. Benson's lawnmower and didn't mention why. I went to the hardware store and nodded at faces that had once looked away. I let my normalcy, my steady, ordinary life, be the counterweight to the chaos I was about to drop into hers. Then I started to share carefully, not with gossip, not with the neighbor's bench. I shared with people who had teeth, people who could make the paper, who ran small but respected outlets, who cared about the truth more than the sensation. I didn't make it loud. I made it credible. A discreet conversation with a young reporter who still believed in digging for facts. A quiet lunch with a church lady who'd chaired countless fundraisers and knew how money moved. A calm, recorded lunch with a lawyer who understood how civil law could do the heavy lifting when people think reputation will protect them. When you want a house pulled apart, you don't start by swinging at the roof. You point to the worn beams, the loose nail, the water stain in the attic. You let one concerned person ask a question and then another until the second question becomes an investigation. I gave those people the nibbles. A photocopy here of a withdrawal. A blurry picture of a receipt there. Enough to pique attention, not enough to ruin anyone on hearsay. Just the right amount to make professionals start asking. That was the other part. I didn't do this alone. I called in favors from a life I'd built before she'd started trading my past like a commodity. Men I once helped, men who kept their own senses of honor, returned the favor without asking for glory. One ran background checks, another quietly confirmed vendor addresses. A retired auditor, a man who'd kept the church's books for decades, went through my wife's charity ledger and found patterns that legislated suspicion. None of it was dramatic. It was methodical. Paper, dates, signatures, a trail that led back to the places where she thought she was invisible. The strangest part was watching the facade start to tremble. People who had lunchtime whispered now felt sick looking at her at the PTA meeting. Friends who loved the convenience of her generosity found themselves uncomfortable writing checks. It happens almost mechanically. When the right kinds of people ask the right kinds of questions, the people who have something to hide begin to flinch. One night I sat across from her at the kitchen table with all of it spread between us like a map. She knew, of course, the moment I stopped playing the broken man she'd staged me as. The moment I started answering phone calls from lawyers and reporters with a calm, measured voice. She realized she hadn't counted on me being able to adapt. "You're going to ruin both of us," she said, throwing herself back in her chair as if the moral high ground still belonged to her. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm making sure the people who deserve to see the truth can see it." "This isn't about you or me, Linda. It's about decency. It's about the fact that you sold whole pieces of my life for petty cash. People deserve to know when someone in their community traffics in secrets." She laughed then, a short, raw sound. "Decency? You're trying to act like a martyr now." The irony. She flung her hands, frustrated, and the motion made her hand tremble. For the first time since I'd found out, I saw real fear in her face and not just calculated performance. We escalated the careful war over weeks that felt like years. I filed civil paperwork to begin to reclaim money. I put the documents in the hands of a woman reporter who had a reputation for fairness, not a gossip column, not a clickbait blog. She dealt in facts and corroboration, and she respected me enough to ask tough questions. I gave her what I had and nothing more. She came back with her own work, interviews, phone records, a vendor who confirmed a pattern of cash-like payments. When your story is built on paper, paper will betray the liar. Meanwhile, I started introducing evidence into the social pathways Linda had always used as armor. I sent copies of a few indisputable records, the motel receipt, the bank withdrawal, to a couple of the community groups she'd been using as a staging ground. Not posted to a feed, not on a gossip site, but to the people who organized the charity nights and handled the funds. Those folks took it seriously because their reputations and donors did. When a treasurer who trusted her raises an eyebrow, that's not idle chatter. That's leverage. It's important to be clear. I wasn't seeking to humiliate for sport. I wanted accountability, and I wanted to make sure there was a record so that if she tried to manipulate the town with charm and tears, there would be paper to cut through the smoke. I wanted the truth to be durable. The fastest way to do that was to use institutions that cared about facts. There were nights I almost lost myself in the plan. I'd lie awake thinking of simpler, meaner ways to retaliate, to pick at her, to scream from the street corner. But the louder the noise, the easier it was for a woman like her to redirect it into sympathy. I needed the opposite. Silence that delivered consequences. A courtroom will not be moved by sob stories if the receipts line up. When the prosecutor in our county finally took an interest, and he did, because he'd been approached by people with clean reputations who smelled trouble, it was because the paper trail had become impossible to shrug off. A criminal inquiry followed a civil one when the transactions suggested deception beyond domestic squabbles. The officers who came to the door were professional, solemn men who didn't take pleasure in anyone's downfall. They were not into theater. They wanted facts, and they wanted victims to be aware. By the time that first knock came, Linda had stopped sleeping. She had become a different woman, thin-faced, rehearsing a script of innocence that got louder and less believable by the day. She told neighbors I was hysterical, that I'd always been dramatic, that I was trying to ruin a generous woman who'd only tried to help. The rehearsed story fell flat where it mattered. With couples who had received a call from an auditor or a cashier who'd been asked about a duplicate invoice. That human voice, the clerk who remembers the time and the card number, it's small and too practical to be bullied away. Then there was my son. Saying it again, pulling him into the center of it, was the hardest thing I've ever done. He deserved to be shielded. I tried. I kept him out of the crossfire as long as I could. But he was old enough to sense the tension, to hear the way people stopped talking when he walked by. He deserved the truth, and if his mother had been trafficking in the story of our family for personal gain, he had the right to know who she was. Saying the truth to him wasn't the dramatic reveal I had imagined. There were no fireworks, just a long, slow falling away. He listened with a kind of stunned politeness that made my chest ache. Later, he asked the questions a kid asks, not why, but how do we fix this? And what happens next? He didn't curse her in front of me. He was better than that. He was one of the reasons I kept my plan rooted in process and not theatrics. I wanted him to see that adults seek redress through systems that hold people accountable. As the legal net tightened, the cracks in her private life widened into manageable fissures. Friends who had once accepted fines and generous gifts from her began to ask for receipts when she offered to sponsor events. That small demand rocked her. She'd always relied on the performance of generosity. The right meals in the right places. Strip the performance with meticulous records and generous errands become liabilities. I watched her unravel in small increments, and it gnawed at me. I'd set this machine in motion, but I hadn't wanted to watch the person I loved become a portrait of shame. There were moments, late at night when the house was cold and the radiator ticked, when grief came over me in waves. I remembered how she'd smoothed my hair when my father died, how she'd laughed with me the first year we could afford to take a vacation. That grief sat on top of my fury like winter snow on a coal pile, cold at first, with heat buried beneath, but she had given away my life like a trinket. She'd traded the weight of my history for cash and rumor. There's a certain clarity that comes with that kind of betrayal. The person who made the choice cannot be trusted to be part of the future. That clarity turned my grief into resolve. I had to keep going until the record was clean and the story was clear. She had chosen herself and lied for profit. People had a right to know. The public exposure happened not as a single moment, but as a series of small detonations that, together, toppled the house she'd built. A column in the local paper laid out the financial trail. An interview on the local public radio station addressed the ethics of charity and accountability, with a treasurer reading a small, redacted list of misplaced funds. A meeting of the charity board, one she'd used as a stage, became the place where she had to answer to actual donors. No microphone could make up the difference between charm and documentation. The community's eyes, once soft and forgiving, hardened. Her reactions became more desperate and more transparent. She called old friends and asked for loyalty. Those friends, when pushed, asked for receipts. She tried to cajole a woman into lying in a deposition. The woman refused. Each failed attempt to redirect blame flipped another light switch on the faces of the people around her. They were watching, and they were no longer willing to be fooled. When a quiet, irrefutable set of documents finally reached the eyes of someone with a statewide platform, the ripple widened beyond our town. The story moved from local pity to a larger conversation. A cautionary tale about the ways people can weaponize intimacy and the consequences of betraying community trust for personal gain. She was no longer merely a woman who had made a bad choice. She'd become an example of the cost of choosing greed over fidelity. And through it all, I kept my composure. I let the legal process move. I answered questions with the blunt, calm truth of someone who'd been wronged. I didn't carry the gloating I'd felt in the private dark into the courtroom. There was no need. The law and a stack of receipts do the gloating for you if you let them. What I never expected was how lonely the victory would feel. When neighbors walked by, their eyes no longer sliding over me with pity, but now aligning in solidarity, I felt something like relief and something like loss all at once. The man I had been, naive, trusting, loyal to the point of vulnerability, was gone. In his place stood a man who had reclaimed his life by making the truth unavoidable. That's not a small thing. It's costly. It's heavy. As the indictments were considered and as civil claims moved toward settlement, Linda's supporters thinned. People who had benefited from her facade retreated quietly. Those who had been misled apologized in low, awkward ways. In the end, the damage done to her life matched the damage she'd intended for mine. Public exposure, loss of social standing, financial reckoning. She had wanted to sell my past and walk away richer. Instead, she found herself selling the only thing anyone had ever respected about her, the story she'd performed for decades. By the time the major pieces landed, legal agreements, a quiet but thorough reallocation of the funds she'd hidden, a letter of apology read by someone who had been hurt by her lies, I felt a strange unspooling in my chest. Pride, not the flashy kind. Something steadier. The knowledge that I'd protected what mattered. My son, my name, the community that still had room for truth. The last thing I did in part 3 was small and private. I collected one final folder of everything I'd used to create the case. Spreadsheets, photos, recordings, and put it in a drawer in my shop. I didn't need it anymore. Proof had done its work. The files were evidence, not trophies. I put the folder away because men like me know when the job is finished, when the truth has replaced the lie and the wreckage has been accounted for. And as I closed the drawer and wiped grease from my hands, I felt the shape of what was next. A future rebuilt on honesty, the slow, steady work of making a home that didn't have to be defended by lies. I'd turned my life into a ledger in order to save it. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't clean. But it worked. The woman who had sold me learned to watch her own back. She stopped talking in public. She learned, harshly and finally, that secrets you trade for cash don't remain your property forever. Once you set that economy in motion, you can't control it. People who profit from rumor and deceit seldom control the narrative they unleash. And that was the last lesson she learned in this town. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, the kind of place where generations of secrets had been dragged into the light, whether people liked it or not. I sat there in my jacket, hands folded, no theatrics in my posture. If there's one thing I'd learned in this fight, it's that dignity outlives rage. Rage is a bonfire. Dignity is a slow, steady flame. Linda walked in wearing her polished smile, but it cracked under the fluorescent lights. Her lawyer whispered in her ear, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes scanned the benches like she expected allies to appear out of thin air. She didn't find them. People she had once dazzled, neighbors, acquaintances, board members, filled the seats, but they weren't smiling. They weren't clapping for her show. They were waiting, with that cautious silence a town develops when it realizes it's been played. The prosecutor started simple: paper, numbers, checks written and cashed, transfers to her account, a neat line drawn from secrets sold to dollars pocketed. Linda shifted in her chair, her hand twitching on her lap. When her lawyer objected, the judge's face didn't change. Every receipt, every call log, every verified vendor detail. It stacked like bricks in a wall she couldn't climb. Then came the testimonies. The treasurer of the charity group spoke about missing funds. A motel manager confirmed her frequent cash-only visits. A community leader admitted she'd been approached to massage the narrative, but refused. Each voice cut deeper than any of my anger ever could. I didn't have to embellish, didn't have to scream. The truth was louder than both of us. At one point, the reporter I'd worked with was called in. She had the composure of someone who knew her work could stand up under scrutiny. She spoke about corroborated sources, receipts, corroborating documents she hadn't even gotten from me. Independent investigation. That was the nail in the coffin. Linda had counted on my word being dismissed as bitter husband's vengeance. But when another professional laid out facts gathered from elsewhere, her story crumbled. And then, almost as if fate wanted to twist the knife, my son was called. He wasn't there to condemn her. The court didn't need that. He was there to answer simple questions. Who handled the bills at home? Who took the phone calls? Who had access to what? His answers were factual, steady, but every syllable felt like a hammer on her mask. She couldn't hide behind family loyalty anymore. She couldn't make me look like a lone madman. When she finally took the stand, she tried to spin it. She cried, played the wounded wife, claimed I'd always been paranoid. She said she was misunderstood. She said she only wanted to help people. But the prosecutor, calm and sharp as a blade, held up one receipt after another, each one signed in her handwriting. Each denial turned into a performance nobody was buying. I watched the room as much as I watched her. Men I'd known for decades sat straighter with every lie she told. Women who once clapped for her fundraisers now looked down, shaking their heads. By the time she stepped off the stand, she wasn't a charming woman in pearls anymore. She was a liar caught in her own snare. The verdict didn't come fast. It never does. But when it landed, it was heavy and final. Guilty on counts of fraud. Guilty on counts of misappropriation. The judge's gavel didn't echo like thunder. It was quieter, steadier, like the last nail hammered into a coffin. She didn't look at me as they led her away. She looked everywhere else. At the floor, at the wall, at faces that no longer softened for her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just deflated. And in that moment I realized she'd lost long before the gavel came down. Afterward, people shook my hand. Some apologized for doubting me. Some just gave a nod, the kind of nod men of my age understand. Respect without needing to say it out loud. My son stood beside me, quiet but solid. We walked out together into the daylight. No words needed. That night the house was too quiet. Victory doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with silence. You sit at your table, pour yourself a drink, and realize you've burned down the life you once had, because it was the only way to stop the rot from spreading. I wasn't celebrating. I was surviving. I thought about all the nights she had smiled across from me, the moments I had trusted her without question, the years I'd believed her love was as deep as mine. That grief didn't vanish just because I'd won. But alongside it was something steadier, relief. Relief that I had faced the fire and walked out. Relief that the truth had been stronger than her lies. A week later, the paper ran the headline, "Local charity scandal exposed, betrayal from within." Her name was in print, her face on the page. People clipped it, folded it, talked about it over coffee. That was her legacy now. She had wanted my secrets to make her rich. Instead, her secrets were all the world would remember. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't strut. I did what men like me always do. I went back to the diner, ordered my coffee, and nodded at the regulars. The world hadn't ended, but it had changed. My name was cleared. My son stood taller beside me. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw a man who had been broken and betrayed, but had clawed his way back with nothing but truth and grit. Linda wanted me destroyed. She wanted my past to bury me. But in the end, it was her future that got buried. She forgot the simplest law of survival. You don't sell the soul of a man who knows how to fight back.